I had a woman in the wake of Hurricane Katrina. I had a woman, I've never really said this in public out loud in front of a lot of cameras, and there's a lot of cameras in this room now. But I had a mother to call me because her son had a very gruesome task. Her son's charge by the Department of Defense was to process 5,000 bodies that had received a single bullet wound to the head. And these were mostly males. And her son was afraid to talk because he had signed a silence agreement. So he only complained to his mother. But the data about these individuals was entered into a Pentagon computer. And then reportedly, the bodies were dumped in a swamp in Louisiana. This is as a result of the tragedy of Hurricane Katrina. Now, I have and I have verification from insiders who wish to remain anonymous at the Red Cross that this is true. I suspect that these were prisoners. And so, you know, this investigation of the whole prison industrial complex is extremely important, and it should not end with just a question of the nature of prisons in our country, but these 5,000 souls also need some justice too.
And yet somehow, a natural disaster spirals into an unnatural human catastrophe.
We're devastated.
We haven't eaten in 3 days.
What turns Katrina into one of the deadliest hurricanes of modern times?
No water, no food.
We don't have a home.
We lost everything.
Why does it take so long to respond to the cries for help? Who makes the decisions and why?
People got to do something. You ain't got no more food.
We got babies out here. We got handicapped people.
On the floor, she's dying right now. 2 people died already.
Where's people? Where's the mail?
Please, somebody.
We need some help out here.
Get out of here. We want to get out of here.
I don't even know if my kids are alive, man.
The facts behind the storm shed new light as we go inside Hurricane Katrina.
Ready to go into these small towns and these neighborhoods and make sure that people were not getting locked in, make sure they were getting aid coming into them, and making sure that the government was not allowing people to be killed, whether it was by the release of these dams and the flooding for a second time, not from the hurricane, but they were flooding these areas for a second time. And my security guy informed me that what they were doing was basically flushing the toilet on Port Arthur, and the bodies that they had seen from the hurricane, whether they were full of bullet holes or whether they were just flood victims, were not there during the second flooding. They had not been collected, they were being washed out to sea. Those bodies are not being recorded in the body counts that are happening down there. And now that FEMA and National Guard took over and suspended all rescue operations, people are, they're bringing in prison ships. And I'm going to tell you right now, do not get on the fucking prison ships, because you might not come back. Because you might not come back. They're allowing the sharks and the fish to eat the bodies that go out to sea, just like they did in Hurricane Katrina. And with millions of people being displaced from their homes and their neighborhoods, you might go missing forever. And they think that you just bugged out somewhere else in the country and can't find you. But a lot of these people are going out to sea.
5 former New Orleans police officers have pled guilty to charges of civil rights violations, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice, among other things. This is the culmination of an 11-year saga after several officers shot unarmed Hurricane Katrina survivors as they were fleeing the devastating floods when the levees broke. The plea deals have vastly reduced the defendants' original sentences, but victims and their families have finally been given at least some justice for the officers' crimes. The police involved were responding to an unsubstantiated distress call on the Danziger Bridge. So they arrived, the police officers arrived at the scene of the crime in a rental truck, and the victims, these individuals, were crossing the bridge trying to seek out food. They had a grocery cart with them. They were trying to find resources. They were stranded. And then the officers arrived and they just started laying fire onto the crowd. They opened fire with AK-47s, with shotguns. As we mentioned, 2 people were killed. That was 17-year-old James Brissett, as well as 40-year-old Ronald Madison, who was actually developmentally challenged. 4 others were very seriously injured. So
this is it's symptomatic of that. The fact that, you know, as Joya mentioned, one of the 40-year-old victim, he was shot and killed with a shotgun wound to his back. Mm-hmm. Gives you an indication as to the extent of the excessive force that was employed. And the Kaufman, who was the architect of the cover-up, mm-hmm. and the senior officer, is now has been walking around scot-free.
Yeah.
Again, that is profoundly troubling for a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. From there, we not only have this heinous crime in the wake of a devastating hurricane, but then you also have police brutality at its worst, and then followed by an extensive cover-up. So they planted a gun. They initially booked Lance Madison, who is the brother of Ronald Madison, saying that he was shooting at police officers. He was later, found not guilty of those charges.
Chris Montgomery says he'd rather be in Iraq than patrolling America. He'd rather be in Iraq than patrolling American neighborhoods.
Walking up and down these streets, you don't want to think about the stuff that you're gonna have to do if somebody pops around the corner.
I mean, shoot in America.
Yeah.
Hey folks, welcome to another video documentary from aplaintruth.info. I'm sorry I don't have better news for you, but this is showing you back in 2005, nothing has changed. It's gotten worse. It's going to continue to get worse. They own the weather. They're flooding out. They're doing it for many different reasons, but there's no satisfaction. Now it's happening to white people too, so hopefully it won't just be a black problem. But say a prayer for the people in New Orleans. Look at this weather forecast, folks. They're inundated. They've been inundated for weeks, and there's no help. All the attention has been on Houston and the Gulf Coast of Texas, but there is no help going to the poor people of New Orleans. So this is footage from just yesterday, I believe, in near Corpus Christi, Texas, there in Rockport and other areas where there is no National Guard. There is no police. There is no army. We're the greatest military operation, Coast Guard. There's none of them. You don't see any of the police vehicles. You don't see any of FEMA. You don't see anybody in these pictures you're going to see. They're not there. I don't know if they're standing down. I don't know if they're not helping. It's just, you're on your own, folks. You're on your own. There is no help coming. So don't think that your government is there to serve you. Govern means to rule. Ment is mental. They're mind screwing us, folks.
What's happening, guys? I'm Abby Martin, and this is Breaking the Set. So last week we traveled down to New Orleans, Louisiana, to examine the city 9 years after the most catastrophic natural disaster to ever hit the U.S., Hurricane Katrina. The images of New Orleans and beyond in the aftermath of the storm are no doubt seared into all of our memories. From people left to die, trapped on rooftops for days on end without food nor water, to entire neighborhoods flooded with toxic water and sewage, Katrina represented one of the biggest government response failures in modern history. Now, you may be asking, why now? Why go there 9 years later? Well, it's because these disasters don't just go away once the cameras are off. In fact, the ramifications of Katrina can be seen today all throughout the city. Because while the French Quarter is booming, just miles down the road in poor black neighborhoods like the 9th Ward, it still looks like the storm just hit yesterday. Murder, racism, and police brutality also plagued the city, serving as a stark reminder of the days when mercenary forces patrolled the streets and cops and civilian militias were given carte blanche authority to kill looters. So today, you'll hear the untold stories of several people who experienced the pain and suffering of Katrina firsthand. With all the horrors that came out of the event, with the government abandoning tens of thousands of people when they needed it the most, the community stepped up to the plate to fill the void. So don't go anywhere, because it's time to break the set.
it's just police are coming out and killing Americans more than ISIS and Al-Qaeda combined. Do we hear everybody talking about that? Puerto Rico death count much higher than currently reported. People have dug mass graves and buried their relatives because of places that have not been reached. Vulture capitalists circle above Puerto Rico and they prey on the victims. It's also happening here. There's the pictures I took last week in West Houston, and the vulture capitalists, disaster capitalists, are coming all in from the 832 area code, 281 area code, offering to buy these houses for pennies on the dollar after these people's homes have been absolutely destroyed by the man-made flooding and geoengineering event that they call Hurricane Harvey. It's just devastation everywhere still there. So what I want to get into was the Las Vegas shooting. Democrats are jumping straight into the gun control debate. This is today the deadliest mass shooting in U.S. history. But what was just the day before? Provision calling for the Hearing Protection Act tucked into the bipartisan Sportsman, Heritage, and Recreational Enhancement called SHARE. Get that one. Require federal registration, but it was allowed destructive devices like suppressors for guns to be passed. The hearing on the bill was scheduled for June 14th, the day of the congressional batting practice, but was postponed until early September because of the shooting. Now another shooting. Wonder what they're doing, folks. And just to bring it home here, the guys that have the guns make endless war, and then they want to take away our guns. That's what they're trying to do here. That's why they're creating the mayhem. And then this goes back to an article I have about Cerberus Capital Management. Cerberus dog guards the gates of hell, of Hades. But what I want to highlight, this guy Steven Feinberg, the chief of Cerberus. You got Donald McNamara on the board. You got all the big wigs, military guys on the board. Dynacorp doing illegal prostitution and child pedophilia for the homosexual rings they have. Cynthia McKinney did a wonderful expose on this. I'll put this in the show notes. But here's what I want to bring your attention to is Cerberus, private investment company that first came to attention when it acquired Chrysler. It's through the Freedom Group has been buying big names and guns and ammo from its headquarters in Park Avenue in Midtown Manhattan. It began with Bushmaster and then in military counterparts, M16s, but its gas-powered mechanisms shot up fast as the trigger can be squeezed. They're also called black guns. Police tied Bushmaster to the shooter in Washington sniper case. Freedom Group on Remington they bought. The group has acquired Marlin Firearms. Dakota Arms has bought DPMS Firearms. Freedom Group has also sold weapons to governments in Afghanistan, Thailand, Mexico, and Malaysia. Contracts worth up to $21 million to upgrade M24 sniper weapon systems. Directly following the Sandy Hook incident, Cerberus loudly announced they were selling the Freedom Group division because it's the right thing to do. Well, guess what they didn't do? They didn't sell their guns, folks. Their sales went up 80-90% the next few years. They still own it. All they did was tell you they were going to sell it. They're under no requirement. Corporations have no morals and no values. All they're trying to do is enhance shareholder value. So please share this with all. The flooding is going to continue. Weather war terrorism is one of their games they're playing to flush people out, flush the toilet, as Ozark Matt said. And it's not going to change until we start getting more aware, becoming more outspoken, and demand that this be stopped. And help your neighbors, help your friends, help those in need. This is me driving through the neighborhood in West Houston. Block after block, suburb after suburb, completely destroyed. It's a month, 5 weeks later. People are still out of their homes. It's humid. They're getting no help. This was a man-made terrorism. Look at the rainfalls. One area has 50 inches, and right by it, it has 10 inches or 7 inches. Anything you can do to help will be appreciated, folks. Thanks. Plain Truth out.
Red Cross, that this is true. I suspect that these were prisoners. And so, you know, this investigation of the whole prison industrial complex is extremely important, and it should not end with. And these were mostly males, And her son was afraid to talk because he had signed a silence agreement. So he only complained to his mother. But the data about these individuals was entered into a Pentagon computer. And then reportedly, the bodies were dumped in a swamp in Louisiana. This is as a result of the tragedy of Hurricane Katrina. Now, I have and I have verification from insiders who wish to remain anonymous to call me because her son had a very gruesome task. Her son's charge by the Department of Defense was to process 5,000 bodies that had received a single bullet wound to the head. I had a woman in the wake of Hurricane Katrina. I had a woman, I've never really said this in public out loud in front of a lot of cameras, and there's a lot of cameras in this room now. But I had a mother